On Halloween, little people that we call children dress up as monsters and wander around the neighborhood trying to get as much candy as they possibly can before the end of the night comes. In Westeros, little monsters that we call children dress up and pretend to be people and wander around the countryside trying to get as much information as they can before the long night comes. All with the goal of bending humanity towards the will of the all-powerful tree consciousness which they have built their society around. If you don't believe me, then we need to have another discussion about the children of the forest. Now, I don't think it's going to be particularly difficult to convince you of this theory because the only child of the forest that we can actually know what she's thinking is Leaf, who can speak the common tongue, and she straight up tells us that this happens. Literally, like right when they meet Leaf, one of the first things she says is dropping this bomb that she has been hiding in disguise for roughly 200 years amongst the world of humanity so that she can watch and learn, all for the sake of the Bran boy. "Who are you?" Mira Reed was asking. Bran knew. "She's a child of the forest." He shivered as much from the wonderment as cold. They had fallen into one of old Nan's tales. "The first men named us children," the little woman said. "The giants called us Wodagnagran, the squirrel people, because we were small and quick and fond of trees. But we are no squirrels, no children. Our name in the true tongue means those who sing the song of the earth. Before your old tongue was ever spoken, we had sung our song 10,000 years. Mira said, "You speak the common tongue now?" "For him, the Bran boy. I was born in the time of the dragon, and for 200 years I walked the world of men, to watch and listen and learn. I might be walking still, but my legs were sore and my heart was weary, so I turned my feet for home." 200 years, said Mira. The child smiled. "Men, they are the children." "Do you have a name?" asked Bran. "When I am needing one." So there it is, all laid out pretty explicitly that Leaf has been for around 200 years pretending to be a person so that she can wander the world of men and listen and learn what's going on for the sake of the purpose of serving the eventual arrival of Bran. Now, this is all very important because that is a major bomb drop, in my opinion, that is not talked about enough in this fandom. We are currently only about 300 years after Aegon's conquest, so if she was born in the time of the dragon and wandered for 200 years, there's not a lot of time for her to have not been wandering, right? She's been wandering for more time than not. For most of history, we should expect to have potentially the ability to find Leaf hiding somewhere, pretending to be someone, and that might even include up until very recently. We do not know how long ago she turned her feet towards home. But the very important thing to really note from this entire thing is that Leaf is just sitting there dropping the bomb that for most of the time that the Targaryens have been in power, I have been out there pretending to be a person. I have been out there in disguise. And then says, "Men are the children. Ha 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 ha." Basically laughing like, oh yeah, it's very easy to fool you guys. We pretend to be people all the time. It's super easy to do. Men are the children. And I've had this idea in my own personal headcanon for a little while now because, it's been a couple years since I realized oh hey, wait a minute, that's really creepy. The children of the forest pretend to be people and nobody really talks about it. But I've always kind of found the children of the forest creepier than most people, when I tell them that I think the children are the ones taking the baby sacrifices rather than the others, which was the traditional speculation in the fandom for a long time. Everyone's kind of stuck on the idea that no, it's got to be the others. The children aren't evil. The children don't do all this creepy stuff. Yet every time we see the children, they're doing rumored to be doing massive blood magic sacrifices to cause huge natural disasters, and they're definitely feeding blood to the trees. We know that for sure. They're potentially feeding Bran Jojen paste. And then Leaf is straight up just saying, yeah, I pretended to be a person for 200 years. The entire time the Targaryens were in power, basically, I was pretending to be a person, all for the sake of this moment that we are in now, also that I could be prepared to help Bran, which is massive. Like, how are there not more theories all surrounding, like, okay, well, who are the children of the forest in disguise? Who was Leaf specifically in disguise? Are there more children of the forest in disguise? Is everyone a child of the forest in disguise? And now, one of the things that was pointed out a lot of the times, because I looked back, like I looked a little bit at the very least. I did a couple searches on Reddit for what it's worth with Reddit's search function, trying to find similar theories to this. And some people have speculated at the things I'm going to talk about here, but no one's really laid it out in a cohesive, like, convincing way to make it kind of a discussion in the fandom, from what I've gathered, right? Like, it's not a thing that's regularly talked about, and in my opinion, it should be. So this is my attempt to do that. If by the end of this video you found it helpful and feel like this is definitely worth talking about more in the fandom, that's going to be up to you to share this video around, and also like and subscribe while you're at it. But let's talk about what I found when I searched for people talking about this theory that the children of the forest pretend to be people. One of the things that many people took as a good debunking of this theory is just how different children of the forest look from people. They are described as having these massive yellow eyes, they have different looking skin, they have different number of fingers on their hands, I'm pretty sure. Like, it's all a bunch of stuff that would obviously stand out, so everyone's like, oh yeah, no, the children of the forest, the size difference, and the physical characteristics, they don't pretend to be people, and most people accept that, yeah, that must not be what Leaf meant, right? But in my opinion, that's missing some very obvious things. The first of those things, in my opinion, is the fact that glamours are an established magical technology that exists in this universe, and here's the thing. Bloodraven is very, very credibly speculated to have been using a glamour in his past, and Bloodraven is very directly connected to the children of the forest. Now, I personally kind of believe that if Leaf has been around wandering, potentially using a glamour to pretend to be a person for 200 years, which, in my opinion, is the correct way to read what she says. She's basically bragging that, yeah, I was glamoured pretending to be a person for a long time. So if that's what's going on, and you read it that way, Leaf could have actually been the one who recruited Bloodraven and taught Bloodraven how to use glamours in the first place. Bloodraven could have been connected to the children of the forest way, way before he came to that cave, which, in my opinion, is also a very interesting thing to think about. But the main point for this theory is the fact that we have a specific magical technology that can be used to do exactly what would be required for what Leaf claims to have done, and we have a person who used that exact magical technology directly connected to Leaf. It's all a direct, straight line. It all seems very obvious to me that Leaf could have been using a glamour, pretending to be a person, and changing her appearance at least slightly enough, right? Because the glamour's a weird technology, right? You need it to be a convincing thing. So you need, Mance needs to wear Rattleshirt's bone armor to keep the glamour working. So it would need to be something convincing, right? Like, you can't have this little 3-foot child of the forest go put on the mountain's armor and glamour themselves as the mountain. That's just not like how that's gonna work. So you still, in my opinion, have to keep it convincing. So what I want to do for the rest of this video now is try and pin down where exactly the children of the forest could be hiding, who exactly Leaf could have been, and the potential story implications of that, because, my god, they are pretty crazy. Also, just to throw in really quickly before we move on to figuring out who exactly these children of the forest are, just to throw in a little bit of extra evidence that this is a thing that has been going on in the history of the world. Another of Old Nan's stories, besides her Children of the Forest stories, is the story of Grumpkins. And whatever stories she tells about Grumpkins seem to imply that they can occasionally steal and replace people, because Sansa is convinced that perhaps Arya is not really her sister. She's a Grumpkin who has stolen her real sister and replaced her. But young, sort of young, naive-brained Sansa thinks that, goes and asks her mom, hey, wait a minute, do you think maybe Arya was, stolen by a Grumpkin and this isn't really my sister? Because she seems so different. And Catelyn's like, no, Sansa, that's not what happened. Arya's not a Grumpkin. And Sansa's like, well, there's no reason that Mom would lie about that, so it must be true. It must really be Arya. So, that's a legend already in universe, is that occasionally some little magical creature steals people and replaces them. So that's another potential hint that maybe that's what the Children of the Forest are doing. So, okay, fans of the channel will actually probably already know this, but I think that the Children of the Forest hide themselves in the form of what we see in Westeros as these woods witches, or these old, short, wrinkled little women who live in the forest for seemingly decades and decades and do their magic. So Maggy the Frog, who gave Cersei a prophecy, was one of these potential Children of the Forest in hiding, who was doing her magic, brewing her potions, and giving fortune tellings for a long time, because in the show, she was made to be like this sort of hot, wilderness psychic lady, whereas in the books, she's like this ugly, wrinkled, tiny little thing. And the reason that I speculate that this is the case is because a glamour would work just perfectly. If you are a tiny little child of the forest, right, Bran describes her as like a small woman. So if you glamour yourself, you don't really need to change that much to appear as this wrinkled old woman, and all of these nature magic things that the Children of the Forest know how to do would work really well for pretending to be a woods witch. So anytime you see a woods witch, in my opinion, little red flag should go up, and you should be looking for other signs that maybe this is a child of the forest. Now, I'm not saying that's what all of them are, but, keep your eyes peeled, right? That's like the first sign, right? You got to start being suspicious when you see these little wrinkled old women who know a lot of things and do a lot of magic for a long, long time. Now, when you take that into account, several very interesting things start to fall into place, because when you realize that potentially these woods witches have been working with the same intentions in mind that Bran and Bloodraven are going to be working towards with the endgame, right? If Leaf has been wandering for 200 years for the Bran boy, and she's potentially been out there longer than Bloodraven's even been alive, she could have potentially recruited Bloodraven. They could have potentially been out there doing other things. She could have been planting other seeds. We all have been speculating, oh, is this Bloodraven plotting all of these things? It could be Leaf. Leaf could be the secret agent in all of this, right? Because the Mad King and his wife were only paired together because of a prophecy that came from a woods witch that said, yeah, this is the specific line that will birth the prince that was promised. So the whole prince that was promised prophecy came from a woods witch, who is very potentially a child of the forest, potentially even Leaf. So yeah, just be prepared to never look at Leaf the same again after this video, because I can never look at Leaf the same again, because Leaf is like the only one that we see who is supposed to be able to speak the common tongue, and that could mean that potentially Leaf has been doing a lot of these shenanigans. Now, I tend to believe that there are probably some other Children of the Forest, like little groups, sort of like the one that we see in Bloodraven's cave. I don't actually believe that that's the only one, but it is definitely possible, with the way the story is written, that that is in fact the only one. But personally, I think that there's actually another potential child of the forest that we've already seen in the story, in the ghost of Highheart, who Arya basically gets yelled at by, which is strange. But it's this little tiny wrinkled dwarf woman who gives prophecies and sings songs and has been around and been old for a long time. And I think that that also could be a potential child of the forest in hiding. Now, that's probably not like anything that's going to be super relevant. I think it's just going to be a nifty little thing that once we have learned more about where I'm going with this theory, it'll look back in hindsight and be like, oh, hey, some of these woods witches that we saw were probably Children of the Forest. Another mention of a witch that I think is interesting and potentially Children of the Forest related is the water witch who Tyrion mentions spat him back up when his father threw him down a well as a baby, because fans of the channel will know that I very much believe that the Children of the Forest lived at the bottom of these wells, and probably to some extent still do live at the bottom of these wells, and took the babies that were thrown down there because that was a constant tradition in Westeros. It's mentioned far too many times for it to be nothing. When you have an unwanted baby, you throw it down the well, and I actually sent all of the information that I had gathered around that specific topic to the Interesting Nerd Club, and they have a whole video on it called The Wells of Westeros, or The Drowning Theory, I believe is the title of the video. And basically, one of the things that I mentioned in there is, yeah, there's this water witch who lives at the bottom of the well and spits Tyrion back up. And also, there was the whole thing about Melara Heatherspoon, Cersei's friend, who she threw down a well after getting the Maggy the Frog prophecy. So literally, potential child of the forest, Maggy the Frog, gives a prophecy which leads to someone being thrown down a well, which tracks really well with my idea that the Children of the Forest live at the bottom of these wells, take the people thrown down there, and then they feed their blood to the weirwoods. Also, it is straight up worth noting, because I did just look this up, I had to stop recording and just look this up briefly. Jenny of Oldstone straight up did just say the Ghost of Highheart was a child of the forest. Like, she came to court with Jenny of Oldstones, and Jenny's like, hey everyone, look at this child of the forest that I have traveling with me. She is a child of the forest. And they're like, no, that's a stooped, wrinkled old woman who gives prophecies. That's not a child of the forest. So, like, when I'm saying this, that Children of the Forest pretend to be people, I feel like I'm not really breaking any new ground, but again, it's just so under-talked about, in my opinion. Like, no, they're out there just straight up influencing the entire course of the events. A small segment of Children of the Forest, pretending to be people, are having massive, massive influences on this story. That is, the Ghost of Highheart is the one who gives the prophecy that leads to Jon's birth. Like, if that's Leaf, and I don't think the Ghost of Highheart is Leaf, because I think Leaf was someone else. So, if that Ghost of Highheart is from, like, the same tribe as Leaf, or is essentially, I mean, it doesn't even matter if they're from the same tribe, because all the weirwoods are one. They're all working for the same greater will of the weirwoods. So, essentially, whether you want to call it time-traveling Bran, or whether you want to call it the will of the weirwoods that the Children of the Forest serve, that's what's going on here. These are Children of the Forest influencing the world, and that is far from the only time that they have influenced things, if these other theories are also true. Because I think Ghost of Highheart is like a slam dunk. She is a child of the forest. Jenny of Oldstone says so. She's got all of the characteristics. Slam dunk, Ghost of Highheart, probably child of the forest. But now we have to move on to potential spoilers for House of the Dragon Season 2. So if you don't want any of those, this is where you gotta go. I'm sorry, there's gonna be some. I'll try to keep it as minor as I can. Like, again, you probably don't really have to go, because it's like on the level of like, this is a character who exists and has a certain few traits and also survives the series. Allegedly, probably. Okay, so some of you may have been able to guess that the character I'm talking about is Nettles, who is described as a skinny brown girl on a skinny brown dragon because she tames a dragon called Sheepstealer, who is a snaky boy like Caraxes. So her and Daemon are riding around on their giant snaky dragons, doing all sorts of shenanigans, which I won't really go into because I don't want to spoil any more than I really sort of have to for what I want to talk about. Now, if you want a more in-depth discussion specifically about Nettles and her very specific role in this theory and all of the juicy details, check out the wonderful video that was done a few years ago by Gray Area when I was looking through all of the places trying to find who other people have speculated could be Children of the Forest when it has occasionally been talked about. That was one of the best theories that I had found, which I really hadn't thought about before, but it all tracks just incredibly well. And I actually really do think there's a pretty good chance that Nettles is in fact a child of the forest, and if Leaf is the only child of the forest who speaks the common tongue, it kind of seems to line up that there's a decent chance Nettles was Leaf, or maybe not, but it's something that's at the very least worth considering, right? I think in my current headcanon, right, which based on where we're going to go for this theory, we are living in this brain space. We are entertaining the idea that that was Leaf, and if so, that makes Leaf a dragon rider, and that's a very interesting thing that could be a major bomb drop coming in the Winds of Winter, because, maybe that dragon is still alive, and, maybe we've seen it already once, and maybe we're going to have to talk about that next episode, because this episode's already getting kind of long, and the entire theory that I want to drop next is all related to everything we've talked about, but it's so massive that it feels like it deserves its own video. So yeah, basically if we're building our top 5 list of potential children of the forest, we got like Maggy the Frog, Ghost of High Heart, any other Woods Witch or Water Witch, Nettles, and then the number 1 slot is just hanging out there for you to guess at for a day or two. It's not going to be long. Part 2 is about to drop for this theory, so subscribe, hit like, and comment your guess down in the comments. Who do you think is missing from this list based on all of the clues for who would be very likely a child of the forest, who could fit the bill that we have discussed, and who would be a jaw-dropping, absolutely crazy secret identity reveal that could be coming later on if they were revealed to be a child of the forest in disguise? If you can piece it all together, let me know down in the comments. You should have everything. I've mentioned it all in this video, and we'll talk about it all and piece it all together next time. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all very soon.